The steady hum of the motel's flickering neon sign filled the silence as Leon S. Kennedy sat on the edge of a threadbare bed. The room was a far cry from comfort: peeling wallpaper, a stained carpet, and the faint stench of mildew that seemed to cling to every surface. It wasn't much, but after the chaos of Raccoon City, it was the closest thing Leon had found to peace. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his blue eyes fixed on the letter in his hand. The envelope, worn and slightly smudged, bore no return address. It had simply been slid under his door while he slept. Leon turned it over again, studying the familiar handwriting on the front. To Leon. The cursive was elegant, precise, a style he couldn't mistake. Ada Wong. His fingers tightened around the letter as he unfolded the single sheet inside. Leon, I'm in trouble. Silent Hill, find me. Please. Ada. It was short, too short, and yet it carried the weight of desperation. He'd seen Ada cheat death enough times to know she wasn't the type to call for help lightly. But Silent Hill, the name meant nothing to him, and there were no clues beyond the note itself. Leon leaned back against the creaky headboard, exhaling sharply. What kind of game are you playing now, Ada? He muttered, crumpling the letter slightly in his fist. Every rational part of him screamed to ignore it. He'd done enough running into hellholes for one lifetime, and yet the gnawing sense of responsibility, the same feeling that had kept him alive in Raccoon City, wouldn't let him rest. By morning, he was back on the road. The directions to Silent Hill were vague at best, pieced together from a faded map at the gas station and the disinterested grunts of the clerk. Nobody goes to Silent Hill anymore, the man had said, barely glancing up from his crossword puzzle. As Leon drove deeper into the countryside, the world seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, and a pale, unnatural fog began to roll in, swallowing the edges of the cracked asphalt road. His headlights barely pierced the mist, and his radio crackled with bursts of static. He adjusted the dial, but it was no use. The white noise seemed to grow louder the closer he got, until finally the faint outline of a sign emerged from the fog. Welcome to Silent Hill. Leon stopped the car, staring at the sign. Even in broad daylight, the letters seemed to loom, their edges blurred by the oppressive mist. He leaned forward, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. You've been through worse, he muttered to himself, stepping out of the car. The moment his boots hit the pavement, the atmosphere seemed to shift again. The world felt wrong. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the soft crunch of gravel underfoot. He grabbed his pistol from the holster at his side, his fingers brushing the familiar weight. Something about this place set every nerve on edge, and Leon wasn't about to take chances. As he walked, the mist thickened, reducing the world around him to a narrow tunnel of gray. Buildings and street signs appeared like ghosts, their shapes distorted and fleeting. The town was eerily empty. Cars were parked haphazardly on the streets, doors left ajar as if their occupants had fled in a hurry. Storefronts were dark, their windows cracked and streaked with grime. Leon paused at an intersection, his breath visible in the chilly air. The silence was oppressive, and the fog seemed almost alive, curling and twisting around him. Then he heard it, a faint sound, like the dragging of metal against concrete. His grip on the pistol tightened as he turned slowly, scanning the empty streets. The sound grew louder, closer, accompanied by a wet, gurgling noise that made his stomach churn. From the mist, a figure emerged. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its body was twisted and broken, its limbs too long and its head obscured by a bloodied, featureless sack. In its hand, it dragged a massive, rusted blade, the source of the grating sound. Leon's instincts kicked in. He raised the pistol, aiming squarely at the creature's chest. "Stop right there," he barked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The creature didn't stop. It lurched forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. Leon fired. The shot echoed through the empty streets, but the creature barely flinched. Black, tar-like fluid seeped from the bullet wound, but it kept coming, its blade screeching against the ground. Leon fired again, this time aiming for the head. The creature staggered, letting out a guttural wail before collapsing into a heap. The blade clattered to the ground, the sound ringing out in the silence. Leon approached cautiously, his pistol trained on the still form. The air around the creature seemed to shimmer, and as he got closer, it began to dissolve into the fog, leaving only a dark stain on the pavement. "What the hell is this place?" Leon muttered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. He holstered the pistol, his eyes scanning the mist. The letter crinkled in his jacket pocket, a reminder of why he was here. "If Ada's here," he said to himself, "she better have a damn good explanation." Leon took a deep breath and continued down the empty street, the fog closing in behind him like a shroud. The fog clung to Leon like a living thing, wrapping around him with an unsettling persistence. His boots echoed on the cracked pavement as he made his way deeper into the town, his every sense on high alert. The eerie silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was oppressive, as though the entire world was holding its breath. Leon had faced the undead, bioweapons and monsters that defied nature, but something about Silent Hill felt different. This place wasn't just dangerous, it was wrong. Leon turned onto what looked like the main street of the town, though the fog made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Street lamps loomed like shadowy sentinels, their light dim and flickering. A diner appeared on his left, its cracked neon sign buzzing faintly. Lucky Cafe. The windows were caked with grime, but Leon could just make out the silhouettes of chairs overturned on tables. He pushed the door open cautiously, the bell above it giving a faint jingle. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of decay. The diner looked like it had been abandoned mid-meal. Plates of congealed food sat untouched, and a mug of coffee still steamed faintly on the counter. Leon frowned, his hand resting on the grip of his pistol. "Hello?" he called out. His voice echoed faintly, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. The diner was empty, or so it seemed. As he moved deeper into the room, Leon's eyes scanned for anything useful. A first aid kit hung on the wall near the restroom, and he grabbed it without hesitation. Beside it, a battered map of the town was pinned to a corkboard. Leon ripped the map free, spreading it out on the counter. Most of the street names were visible, but several parts of the map were smeared with dark stains, making them unreadable. Still, it was better than nothing. He traced his finger over the layout, muttering to himself. Main Street, Nathan Avenue, and what's this? One section of the map was circled in red, Brookhaven Hospital. Before he could dwell on it, a sound cut through the silence, a wet, dragging noise, followed by a faint rhythmic tapping. Leon froze, his pulse quickening. The sound was coming from outside. He folded the map and shoved it into his jacket before drawing his pistol. The noise grew louder, accompanied by a faint scraping. Leon backed toward the door, his boots crunching against broken glass on the floor. The moment he stepped outside, the fog seemed to close in tighter. The scraping sound was clearer now, echoing from somewhere to his right. Leon moved cautiously, his pistol raised. His breath puffed out in quick, shallow bursts as he scanned the fog. Then he saw it. At first, it was just a shape, a hunched figure staggering toward him from the shadows. As it drew closer, its twisted form came into focus. It was humanoid, but only barely, Its skin was pale and mottled, stretched too tightly over its bones. Its head twitched erratically, and its arms hung limply at its sides, ending in jagged bony protrusions. Leon aimed for its chest, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Stay back," he barked. The creature didn't stop. Instead, it let out a choking, gurgling noise, lurching forward with unnatural speed. Leon fired. The bullet hit its mark, but the creature didn't go down. It staggered, a spray of dark fluid erupting from its chest, but it kept coming, its movements even more frantic. "Damn it," Leon muttered, firing again. This time he aimed for the head. The creature let out a final guttural wail before collapsing to the ground. Its body convulsed once, then lay still. Leon didn't lower his weapon immediately. He watched as the creature's form began to dissolve, its flesh melting away into a black, tar-like substance that seeped into the cracks of the pavement. Within seconds, it was gone. "What the hell is going on here?" Leon muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The sound of static broke the silence. Leon froze, his eyes darting around for the source. It wasn't coming from the fog. It was coming from his own jacket. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small handheld radio he didn't remember packing. It crackled with bursts of static, the noise growing louder and more erratic. As he turned the dial, trying to adjust the signal, a voice broke through the static, faint and distorted but unmistakable. "Leon, help me." Leon's blood ran cold. "Ada," he whispered. The static flared again, drowning out the voice. Leon clutched the radio tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked down at the map he'd taken from the diner, his eyes locking on the red circle around Brookhaven Hospital. "If you're there," he muttered, folding the map and tucking it back into his jacket, "you'd better be alive." He turned and began moving down the street, his pistol drawn and his eyes scanning the fog. The faint sound of static followed him, an ominous reminder of the horrors that awaited. The hospital loomed ahead, its jagged silhouette cutting through the fog like a jagged wound in the landscape. The cracked sign above the entrance read Brookhaven Hospital in faded letters, its edges rusted and flaking. Leon paused at the base of the steps, staring up at the decaying building. The radio in his pocket crackled faintly, a subtle warning that danger was never far away. Brookhaven Hospital, he muttered under his breath, gripping his pistol tightly. Of course, it had to be a hospital. He scanned the street one last time before climbing the steps, his boots echoing on the worn concrete. The glass doors at the entrance were smeared with grime and streaked with handprints, some large, some disturbingly small. With a cautious push, Leon stepped inside. The air inside the hospital was thick and oppressive, carrying the stale metallic tang of blood and decay. Flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting erratic shadows that danced along the walls. A reception desk stood at the far end of the room, its surface cluttered with papers, overturned coffee cups, and a phone that had long since gone silent. Leon moved forward, his pistol raised, his boots squelched against the floor, which was slick with a thin layer of something dark and wet. His eyes darted to the walls, where smeared handprints trailed off into the shadows. "Great," he muttered. "This just keeps getting better." He approached the desk and sifted through the mess of papers, searching for anything useful. Most of the documents were illegible, their ink smudged and faded, but one stood out. A patient record with the name A. Wong, scribbled hastily at the top. Leon's stomach tightened. "Ada." Before he could read further, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hall. Leon spun around, his pistol trained on the source of the noise. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a young woman in a nurse's uniform, her blonde hair framing a face that was both serene and unsettling. "Whoa, easy there," she said, holding up her hands. "I'm not here to hurt you." Leon didn't lower his weapon. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head, her lips curving into a faint, almost dreamy smile. Lisa Garland. I work here. Or, well, I used to." Leon's grip on the pistol tightened. There was something off about her, something in the way her eyes never quite focused, as if she were looking past him rather than at him. "You shouldn't be here," Lisa said, taking a step closer. "Brookhaven isn't safe." "No kidding," Leon muttered, his tone edged with frustration. "I'm looking for someone. A woman named Ada Wong. Does that name mean anything to you?" Lisa's smile faltered, and she glanced down at the floor. "Maybe," she said softly. "But if you want answers, you'll need to go deeper." "Deeper?" Leon asked, frowning. Lisa nodded, her eyes lifting to meet his. "This town, it's not like anywhere else. It doesn't just show you what's outside. It shows you what's inside. Your fears, your regrets, your guilt. If you want to find her, you'll need to find the key." "What key?" Leon demanded. Lisa stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The key to yourself." Leon's frown deepened, but before he could press her further, the radio in his pocket erupted into static. Lisa's head snapped up, her serene expression replaced with one of panic. "They're coming," she said, her voice trembling. "You need to go, now." The lights above flickered wildly, as the sound of wet, dragging footsteps filled the hall. From the far end of the corridor, twisted figures began to emerge, grotesque, humanoid creatures with gaping mouths and jagged limbs. Leon didn't hesitate. He raised his pistol and fired, the sharp cracks of gunfire echoing through the hospital. One of the creatures fell, its body convulsing before dissolving into a puddle of black tar. "Run!" Lisa shouted, grabbing Leon's arm. Together they sprinted down the corridor, the creatures shrieking and clawing at the walls behind them. Leon fired over his shoulder, taking down another monster, but more kept coming, their distorted forms writhing in the flickering light. They burst through a set of double doors and into a stairwell. Lisa slammed the door shut and jammed a rusted pipe through the handles, her chest heaving as she turned to Leon. "That won't hold them for long," she said. "What the hell were those things?" Leon demanded. Lisa's expression was unreadable. "This town is full of monsters," she said. "But the worst ones are the ones you bring with you." Leon's jaw tightened. "What does that mean?" Lisa ignored the question, instead pointing to a rusted door at the top of the stairs. "If you want answers, you need to go up there." Leon hesitated, his instincts screaming that this was a trap, but the look in Lisa's eyes stopped him. For all her cryptic warnings and unsettling demeanor, there was something in her expression, a flicker of genuine concern. "What about you?" he asked. Lisa smiled faintly, stepping back into the shadows. "I'll be around. Be careful, Leon." Before he could stop her, she disappeared into the darkness. Leon climbed the stairs, his pulse racing as he reached the door at the top. He pushed it open, stepping into a room bathed in dim red light. In the center of the room stood a single object, a mirror. As he approached, his reflection stared back at him. Only it wasn't his reflection. The man in the mirror wore his face, but moved independently. His expression twisted into a cruel smile. Leon froze, his breath catching in his throat. "What the hell?" The room pulsed with an eerie red glow, the walls seeming to throb like the inside of a living organism. Leon stared at the mirror, his pistol gripped tightly in his hand. The man in the reflection, his reflection, smirked back at him, but its movements were out of sync with his own. "Who are you?" Leon demanded, his voice low and steady. The figure in the mirror tilted its head, its smirk widening. "Who am I?" it repeated, the voice distorted, like Leon's but overlaid with something cruel and mocking. "I'm you, of course. Or maybe I'm what you're afraid to see." Leon took a step closer, his pulse quickening. "What are you talking about?" The figure let out a low chuckle, its eyes gleaming with malice. "You don't belong here, Leon. Silent Hill isn't for heroes. It's for the broken, the damned, the ones who can't face what's inside." The words cut deeper than Leon wanted to admit. He clenched his jaw, leveling his pistol at the mirror. "If you're trying to scare me, you'll have to do better than that." The reflection's smile twisted into a snarl. "Oh, don't worry, I'll show you, but first..." It raised its hand, pointing behind Leon. A sharp metallic clang echoed through the room. Leon spun around, his finger tightening on the trigger. The mirror's glow faded as the walls around him began to peel away, the plaster dissolving into rusted metal and blood-streaked chains. The floor cracked and splintered, revealing a dark, bottomless void beneath. The air filled with the wail of a distant siren, its haunting tone rising and falling like a mournful cry. "No," Leon muttered, his breath coming in rapid bursts. "What is this?" The siren grew louder as the transformation overtook the room. The light flickered and shadows danced wildly on the walls. Leon staggered back, his heart pounding as the floor beneath him shifted and twisted. He heard them before he saw them. Wet, slithering sounds accompanied by low, guttural growls. Shapes began to emerge from the darkness, their distorted forms crawling toward him. Leon raised his pistol, firing at the first creature that came into view. It was a grotesque amalgamation of limbs and faces, its body pulsing with veins of black ichor. The bullet struck it in the chest, and it let out a piercing shriek before collapsing into a puddle of writhing flesh. More creatures followed, their twisted forms barely human. One lunged at him with jagged claws, and Leon barely managed to sidestep, firing a round into its deformed head. "Damn it," he growled, backing toward the door. "How many of you are there?" The radio in his pocket erupted into static, its noise rising to an unbearable pitch. Leon gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to cover his ears. The sound seemed to amplify the creature's movements, driving them into a frenzy. Leon kicked open the door and stumbled into the hallway, the world around him still warped and shifting. The walls were lined with rows of decayed lockers, their doors rattling violently as he passed. From one of the lockers, a soft, muffled voice called out, "Leon!" He froze, the voice sending a shiver down his spine. "Ada?" he called, his voice echoing down the empty hall. The voice came again, this time clearer but tinged with pain. "Leon, help me." Leon approached the locker, his pistol at the ready. The door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but darkness inside. As he reached for the handle, a figure lunged out of the shadows. A twisted, nightmarish version of Ada, her face distorted and her eyes glowing with malice. She let out an inhuman scream, clawing at him with elongated fingers. Leon fired instinctively, the shot echoing through the corridor. The creature staggered back, its form flickering and shifting before dissolving into smoke. His hands shook as he lowered the pistol, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "That wasn't her," he muttered, trying to steady himself. "That wasn't Ada." The siren faded, leaving the hallway in silence. The world around him remained twisted, but the immediate threat was gone. Leon pressed a hand to his chest, willing his heart to slow. In the distance, a faint light flickered. He followed it cautiously, his boots crunching on the blood-stained floor. The light led him to a small, decrepit room, an office with overturned furniture and papers scattered everywhere. On the desk lay an old, rusted key. Beside it was a photograph, worn and faded but unmistakable. It was a picture of him and Ada taken during their brief alliance in Raccoon City. Leon picked up the key, his fingers brushing against the edges of the photograph. The words Brookhaven Basement were scrawled on the back in red ink. "Basement," he said aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course it's the basement." As he turned to leave, the distorted reflection from the mirror appeared in the broken glass of the office window. Its voice was a low growl, filled with malice. "You can't save her," it said. "You couldn't save anyone." Leon stared at the reflection for a long moment, his expression hardening. "Watch me." The basement of Brookhaven Hospital was a labyrinth of rusted metal and darkness. The walls, slick with some unidentifiable black ichor, seemed to breathe as Leon moved deeper into the bowels of the building. The faint rhythmic drip of water echoed through the corridors, punctuated by the distant screech of something dragging itself across the floor. Leon gripped the rusted key he'd found, his knuckles white. It felt heavier than it should have, as though the weight of his decisions pressed down on him with every step. The radio in his pocket crackled softly, its static rising and falling like a heartbeat. The sound wasn't comforting. It was a reminder that something unnatural was always nearby. Ahead, a door loomed. Its surface was marked with scratches, as though someone or something had tried desperately to claw their way in or out. Above it, a single flickering bulb cast erratic shadows across the tarnished sign. Exam Room 4. "This has to be it," Leon muttered, sliding the key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in dim, reddish light. At the center stood a large, cracked mirror, its surface smeared with dark streaks. Leon stepped inside, his boots crunching on shards of broken glass scattered across the floor. The mirror dominated the space, its jagged edges reflecting the room in distorted fragments. Leon approached cautiously, his reflection shifting as he moved closer. At first, the image seemed normal, but as he stared, it began to change. The Leon in the mirror grinned, a twisted, malevolent expression that sent a chill down his spine. The reflection raised a pistol, aiming it directly at Leon. "What the hell is this?" Leon growled, raising his own weapon. The mirror version tilted its head, its grin widening. "You already know," it said, its voice a warped version of Leon's own. "You've been running from it since Raccoon City." The room darkened, the red light pulsing like a heartbeat. Leon's breath caught as the walls seemed to dissolve, replaced by the crumbling ruins of a police station. "No," he whispered, his eyes darting around the familiar setting. "This isn't real." The mirror's surface shimmered, and suddenly Leon was no longer alone. Figures emerged from the shadows, familiar faces twisted into grotesque forms. Marvin Branna, his body decayed and eyes hollow, staggered toward Leon. His voice was faint, a distorted echo of their last moments together. "You left me behind." Leon's chest tightened. "I didn't have a choice." Another figure appeared, a woman clutching her side, blood seeping through her fingers. It was Annette Birkin, her face pale and lifeless. "You let me die," she hisses, her voice filled with venom. Leon stepped back, his pistol trembling in his hand. "I couldn't save everyone." The shadows shifted again, and this time it was Ada who emerged. Her form was fluid, shifting between the confident, enigmatic woman he remembered and a monstrous version of herself, her eyes glowing red, her movements sharp and unnatural. "You let me go," she said, her voice cold and accusing. "How many times will you fail the people who trust you?" Leon's back hit the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The radio in his pocket erupted into a cacophony of static, drowning out the accusations. "No," he shouted, his voice breaking. I tried to save you all." The mirror version of Leon stepped out of the glass, its form solidifying as it approached. Its grin was gone, replaced by a sneer of contempt. "You call yourself a hero," it said, circling him like a predator. "But you're nothing more than a survivor. You saved yourself, and that's all you've ever done." Leon's grip on his pistol tightened. "I've done the best I could." "Have you?" The reflection shot back, its voice dripping with mockery. "How many died because you weren't strong enough? How many more will suffer because you couldn't protect them?" The air grew colder, and the distorted figures around him began to close in. Their voices overlapped, a cacophony of blame and anguish. "You left me behind. You let me die. You failed." Leon dropped to his knees, clutching his head as the voices grew louder. Suddenly, Lisa's voice cut through the noise, soft but steady. "Leon," she said, "the key isn't about saving others. It's about forgiving yourself." Leon's eyes snapped open. The distorted figures around him froze, their movements stuttering like broken animations. He looked up to see Lisa standing at the edge of the room, her expression calm and kind. "You can't carry the weight of every failure," she said, stepping closer. "You've done all you could, but until you accept that, this place will never let you go." Leon's gaze shifted to the mirror version of himself, its sneer faltering. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his hands steady. "You're right," he said, his voice firm. "I can't save everyone, but I can save myself." The reflection snarled, lunging at him. Leon raised his pistol and fired. The mirror shattered, its shards scattering across the room. The distorted figures dissolved into mist, their voices fading into silence. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, and the room began to return to its original form. Leon stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving as he lowered the pistol. The radio in his pocket crackled softly before going silent. Lisa smiled faintly from the doorway. "You found the key," she said. Leon looked down to see a small silver key in his hand, its surface engraved with a simple symbol, a door opening into light. "Where does this go?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Lisa's smile widened. "Home." As Leon stepped out of Brookhaven Hospital, the fog began to clear, revealing the faint outline of his car in the distance. The oppressive silence of Silent Hill gave way to the soft rustling of trees in the breeze. He climbed into the driver's seat, the silver key warm in his hand. As he started the engine, he glanced at the passenger seat. The letter from Ada was gone, replaced by the folded map of Silent Hill. Leon exhaled deeply, his grip on the steering wheel firm. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, he felt lighter. The car disappeared into the fading mist, leaving Silent Hill behind.